but in 2019, for example, or even 2018. And I mean, our project in Jordan proves that it is, at some scale, possible. But many blockchains are not enterprise ready right now. Working on IOTA very happily last weekend, we experienced once again that there has to be much work to be done. But just a small number of people is actually working on the core protocol of blockchains. We, for example, Datarella, we aren't. We work with the blockchain, and we expect the blockchain to be there somehow and working. But just a small number of people is actually working on the evolution of blockchain. And we thought hard about how to support this thing, to actually change that. And we invented the blockchain, our solution, the blockchain evolution incentive scheme. And for that, we created a token. A token called CrowdStart Coin. We have a few billion of this token. It's pre-mined, it's there. It's an ERC20 token. Standard Ethereum, standard token. And we will, in 3 phases, give this token away to blockchain developers who add their resources to the evolution of the blockchain, to the core blockchain development. So, in the first phase, we decide to whom and how many tokens we will give away. In the second phase, we will have a smart contract-based token distribution, so semi-automated. And in the third phase, and that will be, I hope that will work, a liquid feedback mechanism for developer consensus. So that's not us who decide who gets the token, but it's the community who decides who gets the token. So 3 steps: centralized, automated, decentralized. And this is how the token, or the coin, not token, the coin looks like. It's an ERC20 token. We have some billions of it. And now, as of today, the value of this token is 0. So you can't do anything with this token. You can own it. You can perhaps print it. You can store it. You can store it on a cold wallet. You can store it on a hot wallet. But we will bring this token to crypto exchanges. And there will be trade. There will be a value. And this is our, let's say, individual, personal, our small experiment. We want to create value with that token so that a developer who in the future adds resources to the blockchain development can use this token he gets awarded with, sell it on a crypto exchange, and gets rewarded with work. That's the general idea. And if you are a developer and you think you already added valuable resources, you can scan this QR code and request your access key, as we call it, access key, by filling out the form. We have started to distribute this token in Gdansk. So they're just a bunch of developers already in possession of this token, but we will see whether it works out. And with that, I want to ask Cohen to tell us a little bit about cryptoeconomics, about cooperatives, collectives, about smart cities, and about how that all fits together. Thank you very much, and Cohen, it's all yours.
No.
Hi, everyone. Hi. And all the millions watching online, right, Jonathan?
Exactly, yeah.
Where's
Just a couple
millions. Okay, I'm from the U.S. I'm based in Barcelona, though. And so I just got off a plane about an hour and a half ago. Got here in time for pizza and beer. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm working with Datarella and on this project I'm about to present. But before I go into the project, I'm going to give some very high-level discussion about some key topics. So I like figures. I like circles mostly. So there's a lot of circles in my presentation. So I thought I'd just show a bunch of them right now and say basically some of them I developed myself, some of them are from other people that I admire, and this is our project basically. But all these things essentially will eventually lead to this. So what our project is about, and I'll get to it later, is essentially about merging a human-centered version of smart cities with an emerging view of the sharing economy that's actually based in real people and actual sharing between people, which I know we all think is what it was supposed to be, but most of us know that's actually not what's happening. And our project is about providing the infrastructure and support and resources, it's called Collaborate, to support this type of collaborative economy. So, but I have to tell the story about how we get there before I can actually tell what we plan to do, what we're working on. So I've been working in the smart city space for 6 years. I'm a dean of research at a business school in Barcelona, so I'm not super, I've had a lot of technology startups, but I'm not a guy who knows how to program in Ethereum or any blockchain technologies, but that's why we have Datarella on our team. For 6 years, I worked in the smart city space, focusing on what I would really say is Smart Cities 2.0 is what I was focusing on. I didn't realize it at the time, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with smart cities, but the smart cities was really sort of a term that was coined by IBM and then embraced by Siemens and Cisco and other multinational tech companies, and then over time, cities started embracing it too. But initially it was software and hardware companies saying, how could we pivot or develop or apply our existing technology, software and hardware, to a new market that we haven't really penetrated yet, and that's the cities. So they came up with a smart cities idea, they started selling it to cities. I call that Smart Cities 1.0. That was tech push concept of a very tech-centric city, urban environment. But about, well, I would say around 2013, we started seeing cities demonstrating a proactive vision to say, wait a minute, we actually like this idea of smart cities, but we don't want the tech companies to tell us what we need. What we want to do is actually figure out where we are, where we want to go, and how technology can help us. And once we figure out what we want, we can then do a request for proposal and collaborate with multinationals to actually implement sensor projects, IoT, all the rest of it. That was 2.0, and that's kind of where I really was focused for many years. And then the last couple of years, as I was observing the evolution of the space, I came to realize there's a new version of smart cities that I call Smart Cities 3.0, and it's co-creation with citizens. And if you notice something kind of interesting, at least to me, the way I decided to name these, this is the only one that actually doesn't have technology in the description. It doesn't mean technology is not involved in Smart Cities 3.0, but technology in 3.0 is viewed as an enabler only, and only when appropriate. And there's lots of things that are now sort of under a citizen co-creation umbrella that are not really technically about technology. Like, for example, participatory budgeting. That is, citizens actually being more involved in deciding how budgets are spent in cities. That's not necessarily, I mean, sure, you can use some tech to help you gain citizen input on those things or whatever that might be, but it's not really a tech solution. It's actually a people solution. And the people, I'm going to keep coming back to the people throughout this whole presentation, because our whole project, Collaborate, is actually about how we can bring people back into, this is my opinion. The blockchain movement has been very much focused on AI and algorithms and technologies that actually remove people from the equation to some extent. And our project is about how can you bring people back in and have blockchain being an enabler to improve people's lives, not just be about sort of supporting technologists. So that's me, similar hat, different hat. And my friend Rob Adams, who's a guru in design thinking, he and I last year went to the Smart Cities Expo with one thing in mind. How could we employ design thinking? This was a model I developed that cities, I worked with cities to implement, which is called the Smart Cities Wheel, which is a mechanism to sort of frame what the smart city space has always been about. But he and I are both really passionate about design thinking. He's a guru in it. He has a company called Six Fingers in the Netherlands. And I said, come to Barcelona, which is the home of the most important Smart Cities conference, which is called the Smart Cities Expo. I said, what if we could merge design thinking? I assume most of you are familiar with that. So human-centered design. You start with sort of building empathy for real people by actually talking to your real target users before you build a product or service. So what if we leveraged the methodology of design thinking and blended it with smart cities? What would you get? If you combine these two, what would you get? And this is what we got, which is basically my wheel 2.0. But because I have so many circles and all the work I did, we decided specifically to do some other shape. So we came up with a hexagon as an alternative. The idea is putting the person, the people, the citizens in the center, not the city. So the wheel, Smart Cities Wheel, was about putting the city in the center, the city administration in the center, and how do they more efficiently, leveraging technology, manage the city to reduce emissions, be more efficient in their spending, improve their mobility. But this version says, you know what? What if we looked at, and this emerged employing design thinking. So actually, how do we do this? We actually went to the Smart Cities Expo, which I've gone to every year except this year. But last year we went to the expo and we interviewed like three dozen technologists. Have any of you ever been to the Smart Cities Expo? Anyone know? So there's literally, it's 15,000 people go to that right now. So it's every year it gets bigger. And the exhibition space is gigantic. And it's everyone selling everything from solar-powered trash compactors to robotics for city. It's all tech, right? And we decided, all right, well, let's interview a bunch of techies and ask them, what is it that makes them excited about living in the city they live in? We asked over 30 people that were like standing behind the robots in their stands and talked to a guy from Microsoft. And none of them actually used technology in their answer, which is not really surprising when you think about it, except for the fact we're at a Smart Cities conference with a bunch of techies. They all said things like access to outdoors and social interaction with other people, good coffee shops, great food, easy mobility, like being able to go bike sharing. We're like, okay, so actually it's not really about technology, is it? It's actually about what makes people happy living in cities. And so we came up with this concept we call happy citizen design, which puts the citizen in the center and says, yeah, it's still smart cities, but it's actually a new way of thinking about smart cities, the citizen co-creation, putting the citizen in the center, what makes them happy. We thought we were like totally revolutionary with this until we started doing research. Well, We did look at the Kingdom of Bhutan. Some of you may know the Kingdom of Bhutan was the first country in the world to abandon basically GDP as a measure of progress. And they said, we're going to measure GNH, gross national happiness, which sounds funny, but it actually is pretty cool because, like, when you think about it, and I'm going to come back to this later, but GDP is a very crappy measure of progress in society for so many reasons. You could have a bunch of multi-billionaires in your society and everyone else really poor, but your GDP could look good because it's an average of your citizen wealth, right? But it's not actually looking at individual well-being. So anyway, we came up with this idea of happiness, and then we found in the UK there's this thing called the Happy Cities Index. So people are already thinking this way too. And then just recently, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, became the first country in the world to have a minister of happiness. It's actually a woman. The first one in the world has a national entity focused only on happiness. And now they brought that to Dubai, and now their Smart Cities initiative has put happiness as the core driver of their Smart Cities initiative. So we thought we were like rocket scientists and we're way ahead of the curve, and it turns out we're just one of many coming to realize the same thing. So all this inspired my book from 2016, which was called The Emergence of the Urban Entrepreneur. And in that book, I developed this framework which essentially looks at the convergence of three things that are driving innovation entrepreneurship in cities. I'm trying to tell a story. I hope you're following me. So I was in the smart city space, looking at everything from the city administration top down. Came to realize I need to start looking at it more bottom up, and how can cities collaborate with citizens to improve the happiness of citizens. And in all this experience, focusing on innovation entrepreneurship, I came to this conclusion that there's three factors that are driving radical change in innovation entrepreneurship and driving it into cities. So we used to think about tech parks in outside, like Silicon Valley. How many of you have been to Silicon Valley? How many of you honestly would actually want to live 10 years in Silicon Valley? 2 years in Silicon Valley. One. We got 1, 2, 3. Okay. I've been there many times. I had a company that had a shared working space there, and it's devoid of life. It's like a bunch of big buildings with no life at all. You can't walk anywhere. You have to have a car to go everywhere. It's crazy expensive. And basically, outside of a few cool places like Palo Alto, no one really wants to live there anymore. In fact, that's why Twitter and many other companies have actually moved into San Francisco, which is causing a whole other problem. So the world is urbanizing. You probably know this, but we've passed the threshold of 50% living in cities. We're moving to around 70% are going to be living in cities by 2050. And there's all kinds of reasons why the world is urbanizing, but then when you start thinking about the underlying factors that affect urbanization and what it's doing to cities, and you say, well, when people move to cities, what do they want? They want housing, they want access to energy, they want good public transit, they want jobs, they want access to food, they need energy, if I didn't mention that. They want cultural activities. They want opportunity. So as cities grow, they have a hard time meeting the needs of the growing population. But actually, there's this type of entrepreneur called civic entrepreneur that recognizes problems in cities as a business opportunity. And say, all right, there's all these issues around mobility, around clean air, energy, where you have insufficient energy, urban food systems are sometimes broken. And the civic entrepreneurs say, instead of thinking about things from a consumer perspective, they actually think about things from a citizen perspective. Again, citizen co-creation, citizen Smart Cities 3.0, this urban entrepreneur, right? So urbanization is driving different kinds of innovation entrepreneurship in cities. Democratization, we're all aware of. I think blockchain is obviously a very good example of the potential democratization of technology, but the idea of democratization is basically the tools of innovation and entrepreneurship are in the hands of more and more people all the time. So there's a quote in that book from a guy in Silicon Valley who says in the 1990s it took $2.5 million to bring a tech product to market. You think about it, you had to have, office space out in the suburbs, you had to have your own servers and your own cooling, you had to build your own software and all these things, your own in-house staff. He says in the 2000s things changed. We had servers in the cloud, we could access software as a service, so we brought costs down. He said, it seems to me now, in the year 2015, we're heading from 2.5 million in the 1990s to 250,000 in the 2000s to $250 now. Now, of course, we could all debate whether $250 you can actually launch a project or not, although if you think about it, with lean startup and MVPs, you can do a lot. Crowdfunding. I love this example. There's a guy named Ryan Gepper, lives in San Diego. Accesses something that I'm going to talk about in a second. Collaborative spaces in his city in San Diego to prototype. Have anybody heard of this project, The Coolest Cooler? It's super cool. It's if you look it up on Kickstarter, well, I guess in Germany it's not warm enough to maybe know about coolers, but you got these coolers you actually put beverages in and you have ice in them and they keep your beverages cold, right? So he came up with this idea for a 21st century cooler. That cooler has the following things. If you open it up, it has an LED light. It has a bottle opener. You can put a pitcher on top and blend drinks on it. It has a plug for your iPhone or smartphone to charge your batteries, and it has built-in speakers so you can plug your speaker and have music, right? 21st century cool. It's a product that's been around for like 100 years. No one's ever thought to innovate it, and he did. He does a prototype by himself. He has no employees, no investors. Does a prototype, posts it on Kickstarter, trying to raise $50,000. Anyone want to guess how much he raised in pre-sales of a product he was going to sell for around $300 to $400? Don't look on Google.
1 million?
Higher.
3?
Higher.
10?
13 million.
Wow. When I see it, you would get 100.
Probably right. There's no blockchain in his product yet that I'm aware of, but there could be. But that's an example. I mean, how much did it really cost him to build one prototype using fab equipment that he didn't even have to buy himself? He could access from a fab lab in his city. Builds one prototype, does a 2-minute video, posts it on Kickstarter, and raises $13 million. So whether it's 250 or not, we can debate. But the point is, servers are in the cloud, software as a service, crowdfunding, co-working spaces in cities. Increasingly, the tools of innovation are becoming more and more accessible to more and more people. So it's no longer about the 1% that get venture capital funded in Silicon Valley, and I know this crowd understands that well with ICOs. And that's another example. Obviously, ICOs are democratizing fundraising. You no longer have to be have inside track to the Silicon Valley investors or VCs to actually raise a lot of money. And collaborative is a third part. These are all like converging factors that are driving innovation entrepreneurship in cities. And this drives a lot of our project, by the way, the Collaborate project, obviously. Here, the idea is two things. We're seeing more types of collaboration with cities between entrepreneurs, the city officials, multinational companies, universities. We used to call it the 3 Ps, the public-private partnerships. I call it the 5 Ps now. Public, private, people, professor, partnerships. So citizens involved, professor. I'm a professor. I'm a university professor, so I had to make sure my stakeholder group was represented. But the other thing with collaborative is a collaborative economy. And whether it's obvious to all of you or not, I'm not sure, but the collaborative economy is most important in cities. The reason it's most important in cities are several. One is you have a density of population in cities that can justify high volume of sharing activity. You have proximity between people, so it's easier to facilitate transactions, sharing services, sharing products. And you have a higher penetration of smartphone technology, which makes it easier to do real-time sharing transactions. So cities are really the home of the sharing economy, even though there are some things in the sharing economy, including some I'll talk about later, that are territorially irrelevant. The borders aren't that important to them, but many of them borders matter, or location matters. So Jeremiah Oyang has been doing some work on the sharing economy for many years. This is his Honeycomb 3.0, so he's done 3 versions of this now. This has, his first one had like 6 components to it, the next one 12, and this one has 16. These are sectors that have been attacked by startups in the sharing economy. All these are examples of logos of companies. So here's logistics as one example. And he has, when you see these dividing lines in the same categories, because they're sub-sectors, right? So within logistics, he has local delivery, shipping, and storage. So in shipping, you have this thing called crowd shipping. So instead of relying on DHL or massive multinationals to ship stuff, why can't you have peers ship stuff? If they have underutilized space in their vehicle, or they're going on a plane and they're going to the same place you need to deliver something, maybe there's a way to actually monetize that and optimize their underutilized resource. So it's in every sector of the economy, money, obviously, goods, health, mobility. In every sector almost, we're seeing penetration of the sharing economy. But what we're seeing is this, everybody wanted to be the Uber for whatever, which, as Jamie Burke, who was here a few months ago, and I was here for his presentation, who's the founder of Outlier Ventures, which is helping incubate our project, he refers to it this way: the Uber for X game is removing the middleman, replaced with stateless tech layer, enrich a few. That's not what we thought the sharing economy was going to be, right? We thought the sharing economy was going to be actually about democratizing access to resources amongst peers. But what we've actually found is these platform capitalists monetizing, monopolizing their intermediary role in these transactions, facilitating peer-to-peer transactions, but the monopoly is actually the powerful one in the transaction. Which, of course, is why Uber has been outlawed in many cities around the world, including recently in London, which we'll come back to in a minute as well. So the issue with this monopolization, we keep hearing of FANGs, you've probably heard of those, the Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, all these massive global powerhouses that seem to be sucking in everything around them and becoming like the dominant force in our economy. We're finding, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a crappy correlation between GDP and well-being for the average person. And we have more and more of these platforms becoming more and more powerful, manipulating, exploiting more and more people along the way, using sharing economy or some other platform to connect them, but actually basically monopolizing the relationship and the transaction. So this comes from McCaffrey from the, I forget what the name of the book was called, but it's he calls it The Great Decoupling. He's from MIT, a professor from MIT. The idea is up until the 80s, there was almost a perfect correlation between growing labor productivity and jobs and income, median income for the average family. But what we started seeing is labor productivity actually increasing, and actually many people are projecting, with some of the technology you guys are developing as well, with AI and IoT and all this stuff, robotics, all the rest of it, that we're going to start moving more this way with labor productivity, like basically a vertical line. But this is actually leveled out like this. So GDP per capita, job growth, not increasing. We know this is happening. Everyone's talking about the future of work, right? There aren't going to be enough jobs for everybody, but that doesn't mean that like life has to end for everybody. We need to rethink our society in a different way. And one part of that is rethinking our economy around peer-to-peer transactions, where peers, humans, are actually back in this process in a more powerful and meaningful way. And that's what our project is about. I'm going to come to that very soon. You're probably all like, yeah, get to the point, but I'm almost there.
Take your time.
All right. I don't know if any of you, has anybody read this book? Nice. Paul Mason wrote a book called Post-Capitalism, which a lot of people hear for the first time think, oh, he's probably just talking about like communism. But that's not what he actually talks a lot about communism. But he's talking about something that's not communism, that's not capitalism, that's not corporate run, but actual civil society, communities actually emerge as a primary force in a new type of economy. I know it sounds crazy, but it's already happening. And so I read this book, and there's a book by Douglas Rushkoff. Some of you probably read Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. Anybody read that book? No? Well, it's a cool title. The reason he came up with that title, he lives in San Francisco area, and he was seeing, there was all these protests in San Francisco, people throwing rocks at the Google buses, because the citizens of San Francisco are frustrated that they're being gentrified out of life in San Francisco. So basically, cost of living is getting so high in San Francisco, an average artist, musician, normal employee in a normal service job, no way they can afford to live in San Francisco anymore. And one of the reasons they can't afford to live there anymore is because Twitter's moved into San Francisco, left Silicon Valley, because Google employees who work in Mountain View in Silicon Valley agree with me, they don't want to live in Silicon Valley because it's a crap place to live. San Francisco has been a great place to live. So all the residents of San Francisco are getting frustrated with the tech influence on the quality of life for average people in the city. They started throwing rocks at the Google bus. They stopped the bus from going, because Google was sending, probably still is, sending buses from Mountain View into San Francisco to pick up their employees to bring them back to Mountain View. So the residents started getting angry at them and started stopping the buses. So Doug's like, this is weird because they're just employees in a tech company. Why are so many people so angry at them? And so he did a deep dive, and he came to the same conclusion Paul Mason did, basically, which is this conclusion. You got the Googles of the world taking more and more and more power, influencing not only the economy in generic terms, but also influencing quality of life in their own city. And they were blaming the employees of Google for their predicament, which is they can no longer afford to live in their own city anymore, because Google employees are buying up all the property in the city. Which inspired me to write this book, Post-Capitalist Entrepreneurship, which came out 2 months ago. And it is about the entrepreneurial opportunities in a post-capitalist society, or post-capitalist economy. So I have commons-based peer production, platform cooperatives, distributed autonomous organizations, alternative currencies and ICOs, post-capitalist cities. These are all chapters in my book, which I have one to give away. We had agreed I was going to give one away. I don't know if you remember that. And I don't know how I'm going to give it away. The person who wants it most, who asks the first question, most engaged, I don't know, we'll figure it out later. I'll give it away.
Most intelligent question.
There you go. And basically, this collaborative project I'm about to present is like a manifestation of all of the stuff I was thinking about in one thing, which is pretty cool. So the question is, how can we lead towards a generative collaborative economy? So instead of an extractive sharing economy, which is what Uber and Airbnb are, how can we move towards a collaborative one that's generative, that generates new opportunities? All right, another image of a circle. I like circles. You can refer to this as many things. I call it sharing economy 2.0. But the tool itself I developed with a colleague of mine in the UK called the Sharing Business Model Compass. I'm not going to go into detail because it would probably bore you. But we studied 36 different business models in the sharing economy. And what we determined was there were at least 6 different components of their business models that varied across all the sharing economy. And furthermore, what we discovered So some of my colleagues in the sharing economy, they have different terms for all this. So the Airbnbs of the world, the extractive ones, the TaskRabbit, if you've heard of them, that basically monopolize the transaction between peers, seek maximum profits from that, and demonstrate very little empathy or concern for whether that actually improves the well-being of the peers themselves or not. Some people call that platform capitalism. So it's basically just normal capitalism by using a platform to connect peers, but it's just same business model basically, same underlying values. Some people, some of my friends in this space refer to them as a platform Death Stars. I don't know how many of you are Star Wars fans, but Death Star being Darth Vader's ship, it sucks everything in and everything. So then there's another. So basically, these 6 components, 4 of which are on a continuum. If you come out the circle, the decisions made are more consistent with what we discovered would be more like a platform capitalist platform. And as you go towards the inside on these 4 right here, they're more consistent with something being called platform cooperatives. Now, I teach entrepreneurship, and I love telling my students nothing in entrepreneurship is black and white. The whole world is gray. We all know this in this room, right? Well, I know with some things with blockchain, everything's hard-coded in, and it's not gray. It's black and white. But in the world of entrepreneurship, it's more gray. So it's not like a company that is generally plotted out here has to be evil, and the ones on the inside have to be good. You can find different examples. But generally speaking, the ones towards the inside are more focused on humanizing sharing economy. The ones more out here are about monetizing the sharing economy, if you will. Okay? So if you want to know more about this, I published an article in Fast Company describing the model and explaining how to use it, and also on a website called Shareable, which is a sharing economy platform. So you can find more on it. If you search Boyd Cohen Sharing Business Model Compass, you can get more details on all the different variables that drive the decisions of sharing economy business models. But what's kind of maybe more fascinating, and I'm going to come back to these in a minute, some of these in a minute, these are just some examples of organizations that are really challenging our understanding of what the sharing economy 1.0 was. And this is more like what I think many people thought the sharing economy was going to be. So Resonate, founded by a guy named Peter Harris. Cooperative platform to facilitate streaming music downloads between artists and musicians and listeners. But the difference is, compared to, for example, Spotify, is that the artists get 2.5 times more revenue per download in this platform than they do in Spotify. Why? Because they're not exploited artists being monetized through a platform capitalist, but actually they're part of a platform that was developed with them. They actually have governance. The artists and musicians actually have influence over the governance of the platform, and the revenues and profits of the platform are actually shared across all of the, including the listeners, but they get a smaller percentage. The developers, the value creators, i.e. the musicians, actually get a higher percentage. And yes, there's still money left over for Peter and his team to actually run the company and get paid for the work they do, but they share the wealth more. Stocksy, same idea, different kind of artist. Stocksy, founded in Victoria, Canada. Another thing I love about this list, not one even founded in the U.S., let alone in Silicon Valley. I'm from the U.S. It's not that I'm not a big fan of the U.S., but it's not like it's about anti-U.S. My point is, this movement is global, and as you move away from venture capital dependent sharing economy platform capitalist models, what you actually find is this emergence, this flourishing of sharing economy platforms from all over the world, because they're no longer dependent on VC funding from Silicon Valley, and the model they've embraced would not be accepted by a VC in Silicon Valley anyway. The founders of these companies don't want a 3 to 5 year exit in 10x for their VC investors. most of the founders of these companies have a long-term view of their project. It's not that they don't want to make money. It's not that they even want to make money now. It's that they want to share the wealth they create, and they are investing in a long-term vision to actually create an alternative economic model to support the community that they're working with. So, Stocksy Victoria, but with photography and video. Professional photographers post their images on there. They are also co-owners of the platform. So it's it's called a platform cooperative. So it's cooperatively owned, but it's technology. This one is agnostic to location. So is Resonate. So even though I'm painting this as a lot about an urban phenomenon, there are cool examples of non-urban, non-territorial dependent platform cooperative type models. Peerby is not a platform cooperative, but it's interesting. It was founded in Amsterdam. They've had a lot of success. They started as a free home product sharing for neighbors. So some of you probably know this. Like the average drill you buy at a hardware store will be used 13 minutes in the entire life. So the rest are just sitting around your house, your garage, whatever. So the idea is, well, when you got there, or you have camping gear, and you use it once every 3 years. Well, in my case, I use it once every 3 years. Sitting around, why not let somebody use it? They started as a free platform, and they basically raised money from donations and grants. But then they decided they were going to do something different, which I would say puts them in this collaborative governance model, which is that they were going to raise money from their own members that were active on this platform to create a new service that was a premium service that people would pay for to share more high-value products in their homes that are actually worth more, and that they want to be, the people that own those items want to be more secure that the person that's renting is going to really value it, and if they're paying for it, they're going to value it. So they raised money like $1.5 million in a crowdfunding campaign, 90% of which came from their own members. So, different way of thinking how you run your organization. You're not raising money from VCs. You're not looking for a short exit. You're really facilitating peer-to-peer transactions between real human beings. Inspiral is a cool network out of New Zealand, I want to say. I don't know if any of you come across it. They're like a platform for platform cooperatives. So they basically spin out all kinds of cool collaborative projects in all kinds of spaces, embracing this alternative view of organizing. And the fab market I'm going to come back to is really cool for makers. We use fab labs. Are all you familiar with fab labs? 3D printing facilities in communities, like 1,000 fab labs around the world. There's probably a fab lab in Munich, isn't there?
Yep.
Yeah. So they have to have minimum technology in the facility to be called a fab lab, and they have to have some kind of minimum access to the community to be a fab lab as well. So it can't be a fully private, exclusive place. They have to allow the community to come in and have access to these maker resources. Laser cutters, 3D printing. Our best fab lab in Barcelona has robotics equipment, has a maker lab for people that do things with garments. So they're much broader than what you'd think a fab lab is, just pure tech geeks doing software coding to print a thing in a 3D printer. They do much more than that. These are all examples, but Fab Market, I should clarify why I'm bringing this in. I'm going to come back to it. Fab Market is a platform for makers who do a 3D design in a fab lab. They can post their design in the Fab Market and sell access to the digital file so that anyone living near a fab lab anywhere in the world can print out that product in their local community instead of having to have it shipped from China or wherever it might come from. All right, so now you're starting to see where we're going, which is to support this community. So, what happens if you combine Smart Cities 3.0 and the Happy Citizen model, sharing economy 2.0, not necessarily only platform co-ops, but these types of enterprises that are putting the people more front and center in their projects, and this sort of, I call this the urbanpreneur spiral. So this sort of very urban, urban innovation space. What do you get? You get what we're working on. You guys are all like, man, it took you like 20 slides to tell us what you're actually doing, but Well, anyway, that was my plan. So C8, it's collaborate, or C8 for short, is a token-powered open infrastructure for a truer sharing economy in Smart Cities 3.0 and beyond. Sharing capital, time, things, knowledge, other things. So the vision is to go towards a new local but globally interconnected digital, collaborative, urban economic model of shared prosperity. There's a lot of words in that. It's a very ambitious goal. We alone can't achieve it, but we want to help move it in that direction. So you think about all these all these projects I was referring to, many of them do have a very local angle to them. But when you start saying, well, what would it take for these projects to actually compete with these platform capitalists? At a local level, sometimes they are succeeding, but when you start going regional and global, they really have a hard time. Now, there's a couple, like Stocksy's done really well for photos. Resonate, the music one, is struggling to compete with Apple and Spotify and the rest. But basically, people expect, we want to believe that consumers in the sharing economy, in the true sharing economy, are going to prefer a responsible, proper, cooperative type platform. But in the end, all of us, myself included, are going to choose convenience as well. I'm staying at an Airbnb tonight. I complain about Airbnb all the time, but I'm staying in one because it's actually more convenient. So until we have a fair B&B, which by the way is an existing platform, a fair B&B, an alternative to Airbnb, but more like a cooperatively owned type model, like the kinds I'm talking about, until we have one that's as ubiquitous as Airbnb, I'm probably going to keep using Airbnb when I travel. And we need to manage this issue around local and global. So the more cooperative type movements are often grounded in territory. They're local. And like I said, sometimes they even do really well locally, but then what happens when you want to compete with a global platform? A good example, I love this story. It happened in Austin, Texas. Really cool. What happened? All right, a sequence of things happened in Austin, Texas. The first thing, Uber and Lyft came in, started taking away customers from the taxi companies. Taxi companies getting mad that they're losing revenue. So guess what the taxi companies did? What can we do? We'll squeeze the drivers. So the drivers were paying something like $100, $120 a week for like the right to be part of their taxi service. And the company said, well, the only way, they did the math, and they said, well, the only way we can actually recover our revenue losses from Uber and Lyft is we got to charge more from our drivers so that we can make our revenue targets. So they doubled the charge to the taxi drivers to $200 and something a week. Well, as we all probably know in this room, taxi drivers are probably not the top 1% of the population, and $200 instead of $100 is a big impact on their quality of life. Well, they had this meeting where they came together, the taxi drivers all angry about what's going on with Uber and Lyft and now their own taxi companies, and they had this meeting and they said, we got to do something about it. Yeah, let's do something about it. Let's protest. Let's do whatever. And then 3 or 4 of the young drivers said, well, what if we first lobby the government and get them to enforce the same regulations on Uber drivers that we have? So they have to have the same kind of license in terms of proving that they actually know how to deliver the proper taxi type service. They have to meet the same kind of regulatory safety requirements, all the rest of it. And they succeeded. And they said, all right, next step. Let's form our own cooperative and compete with the own companies we work for right now. And they did. And guess what? They won. I think there's like 800 or 1,000 taxi drivers in the Austin Cooperative, and Uber and Lyft left town. Awesome story. How do we replicate that globally? The answer is not that same thing has to happen in every community, and every taxi co-op that's formed has to build their own software and their own app and try to compete locally with Uber, because guess what? We go back to this problem. Convenience. It's great. If I live in Austin and I use this taxi co-op app, works great. Lots of drivers around. I get great service because the drivers are owners of the platform, so they care, right? The problem is, I get on a plane and come to Munich or London or New York or LA, and guess what? My app is useless. So what am I going to do? Go back to Uber, probably. Now, when I go back to Austin, maybe I'll stay loyal to the local taxi app, but when I go everywhere else, I can't. So it's a totally inefficient system to have all these locally organized initiatives trying to compete with Uber and the big platforms around the world. And they don't have the money, they don't have the technology capabilities and resources to program and compete with Uber by themselves. So they have to white label or outsource the development of all this stuff. What all of these initiatives need is an underlying tech platform that they can plug into and immediately compete anywhere in the world with any of these other global platforms. In a way that when I download the app, which by the way we're working on one called Cooperative, which is a regulated taxi driver, global but locally owned, interconnected network of co-op taxi companies. So you at any city in the world can have your own co-op taxi company. You share your income however you want. You tap into our technology, and you can go live very quickly with technology that competes with Uber in terms of the service quality. The service quality of the technology, it can locate you. You can pay online with crypto or a fiat and the rest of it, or our own token. That's what we're working on. So, probably all of you guys have seen this. This is another Jamie slide, by the way. My Datarella friends would know that when they saw that. The boy didn't come up with that slide himself, did he? Well, basically, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to offer these alternative sharing economy platforms that are emerging around the world, we're trying to offer them a fat horizontal stack that allows them to have world-class technology at their fingertips without having to develop it themselves, and then they plug in their app layer on top. So what are we actually planning to build? You guys have been waiting for a while probably to see this. Datarella is going to be leading the development of this. Color-coded reputation, financial and data services, governance, and applications. So in order, we go from the inside out. All the way through here is internal development with some outsourced coding. We will be offering tokens to some developers externally to help us finish this out. And we're also in discussions to collaborate with lots of other organizations, some of which are actually other investees in the portfolio of Outlier, like IOTA or the Identity One Sovereign. We're already talking to them. For example, with Sovereign, Jonathan was talking to them yesterday?
Today. Yeah.
We're working with them. So it was brought up earlier today, liquid democracy, liquid decision-making, liquid contributions, where basically you could have any community of stakeholders be able to have influence over governance of a system in two ways. They can independently vote individually, and if you can confirm and validate their identity, but they can also delegate their vote to somebody else. Liquid democracy is starting to become a big topic in the smart city space, by the way. So it's another example of where we're seeing this fusion between the humanizing of the sharing economy space and the humanizing of the smart city space. So we're hoping to build a liquid democracy functionality that would allow, it would have impacts in many ways. In the governance of our entire ecosystem, C8, I should mention this is all under this concept that Outlier came up with called the community token economy. So instead of these very narrow ICOs that are focused on supporting, like basically being a financing vehicle for one technology company. The idea of a CTE, community token economy, is you actually create a platform more horizontal and you support an ecosystem of actors at the app layer that can all interact together and leverage the same token and increase the utility of the token. And I'm going to come back to that with like a real example. It's not a real live example, something we can do tomorrow, but it's where we're trying to go. My next slide, I think, is on that. So also, data commons is a big topic in smart cities. Another example where, so some of these things could be useful for the ecosystem. Some of them will be used at the app layer. So if you are, I mentioned Fab Market, right? So we're going to have some kind of liquid democracy for governing our whole project, collaborate. So you as a token holder could have influence over who our board of directors are and strategic decisions we make. But if you're an active member of the Fab Market community, you can also, they can also use liquid democracy for making decisions at the app layer. But furthermore, we're thinking about things like at the data commons level and the liquid democracy level, since we're hoping to work more and more with cities and helping them embrace the sharing economy in their city. We're thinking maybe some of these technologies could be useful at the city layer too, as a sort of a standalone module possibly. I'm going to give you to bring this home, I'm going to give you an example I created that's very fictitious except for the start. Ingi is a real person, a woman from Iceland who lives in Barcelona. She's actually actively involved in the Fab Lab in Barcelona. I think she's an architect by training. So far, this is all true. Pretty soon, not so much. She's been working. She was doing her MVP, or minimum viable product, of a solution that would allow people in urban environments, coming back to the city thing, sharing economy, cities, big thing, right? Fab labs are in cities. The MVP is developing this concept idea for being able to hang your bike in your apartment. Makes sense, obviously. We have, small spaces in buildings, and many buildings don't have biking spaces underground. Now it starts to get a little fictitious, but follow me for a minute. Normally, she goes by bike share to the Fab Lab when she's working on prototyping her design. But today, she's got her prototype and she wants to take it home and try it in her house. So she uses her app and brings in Coopify, our platform co-op taxi app that we are actually working on. The driver comes, beautiful car, very clean, no sound. Ingi says, "What's going on? This is a great car, but I don't even hear it. Oh, it's an electric. Oh, what is it? Oh, it's a new Tesla Model 3. But those are not cheap." Well, yeah, but I use this Money Circles app, which these guys are developing, to get a peer-to-peer loan. With that loan, I was able to acquire this Tesla. As probably many of you know, one of the best use cases for electric vehicles is in taxis. The return on investment is sometimes within a year, 2 years max, in the fuel savings alone. So Ingi's in the car, loving the car, finds out that Money Circles is part of this whole ecosystem too, and that he got funding from the Money Circles. So he's listening to the music, whoops, in the car. See if this works. Maybe not for all of us. It's actual music. So she asked the driver, "This is interesting, what's this song?" And the driver looks on his panel and says, "This is a group called AGF. It's called Capitalism Crashed." It's actually a real song. All right? I couldn't believe I found that song. And that song is on Resonate. It actually is on Resonate. And by the way, we're very far along with Peter Harris, who's the founder of Resonate. He wants to play with us in this ecosystem.
This very song.
Well, this song maybe not so, but that song is really called Capitalism Crash, and it's really on Resonate. I'm not lying. So now Ingi gets home, And she tests her bike rack on her wall, and she's like, this is working. I'm ready to sell this item online. She goes to the Fab Market, who, by the way, we're also very advanced talking with. They want to partner with us, too. And she's going through the online tool to actually post the item she's selling and how she's selling it. Because in the Fab Market, they allow you to actually sell a physical item and send it to somebody, especially if they're local. Or you can send them the electronic design. They can download it, of course, with different prices. And when she gets to a checkout, like how much she's going to charge and what currency she's willing to accept, she has the option to take fiat, other crypto, RCA token, or time. And she says, time? That's kind of odd. What's time? She clicks on time, and she gets this pop-up box about Sophia's, which is a time bank, which is another sharing economy platform that says instead of providing expertise for cash, you put in time. I offer 2 hours of my expertise about smart cities to someone in this room that's part of Sophia's, and then you owe 2 hours to the community of Sophia's, not to me, but somebody else in the community owes me 2 hours that I could choose. Because it might not be likely that you have 2 hours of expertise I want, but you have expertise somebody else wants. And so it goes around in the community. Time banks are very common around the world. There's thousands of time banks around the world. But we're just now starting to get to see time banks that are scalable platform tech type time banks that also address not just hyper-local expertise, but also global expertise that can be tapped in through using video technology or whatever. But she gets this, by the way, since you haven't downloaded Sophia's yet, if you download it today, you get 80 extra citizenship reward points. And when she goes into what is citizenship reward points, these are, it's like an extra kind of token. We're still working on whether it's actually a separate token or if it's actually points. But the idea is we're going to incent high utility, not just of our token, but of the whole ecosystem. And what we're trying to do, as you can hopefully see with this example I've invented, is facilitate ways for 1 + 1 = 3. So instead of this just being about a horizontal stack, you can be an app developer anywhere in the world, you just plug in and play and you're good to go. No, we're trying to create like a family here, a whole community where there's synergy. In fact, part of this idea for part of this came from when I had a talk with Peter Harris. I think Jonathan was on the call that time. And he said, you know, I told him what we were working on with Cooperative, and he said, you know what? I would love to be the preferred provider of streaming music service in all the taxis in Cooperative. That honestly, that thought hadn't crossed my mind yet until he said it. But that's what we're trying to look for. How can we encourage and stimulate this sort of cross-fertilization of users and app developers in the ecosystem in ways that create these sort of positive synergistic benefits for everyone, the user and the app developers. So I'm wrapping up now. So we don't want to just create another digital gold. We're trying to actually create a highly utility-focused token that has some upside for investors. Where our white paper is like days away from being completed internally, but we still have some time before we publish it outside yet. Remind you of all these shapes you've now seen, mostly circles, some other things. And we're focused on guaranteeing a people layer, so we're sort of converging the people layer of smart cities and the people layer of the sharing economy into one. And this is my final quote, and this is just something I feel passionate about. It's the people, stupid. So I don't know how many of you know, but again, because I'm from the U.S., 20 years ago, Bill Clinton, there was a campaign, he was running for president, there was this whole political debate going on, and at one point he said, you know, it's the economy, stupid. That what influences people to vote Republican or Democrat ends up being about whatever the economy, how well the economy is doing. The economy is doing well and it's a Republican in office, they're going to vote Republican. Basically was his point. And I feel like this is my personal view, and I don't know if I speak for the whole project team, but this is my view. The sharing economy has been usurped by the VCs and the multinational tech companies based in Silicon Valley. And we need to bring the humans back into this equation in a powerful way. And those examples of all these companies that are real, that are doing cool stuff, are showing the way how this is possible. We need to bring humans back into the city space. And I also think we need to bring humans into the blockchain space. I know humans are developing blockchain, but when I look at all the projects that are most overlapping with our idea, they all want to convert everything to algorithms. Like, one of the coolest projects that's the closest to ours, and a lot of, business classes will tell you should never name your competitor if you don't have to, and I'm naming one that I don't really think they're a competitor, but they're close to us, District OX. And they even have a way to say, you know what? There should be some sort of variable ownership based on contribution. But it's all automated through an algorithm. Makes sense if you're like collaboratively building open source software. I get that. But when you think about a lot of the blockchain community is building tech for blockchain geek people. You go to the platforms of the coin exchanges, it's all for geeks. In fact, I have all these, I've had 3 MBA teams from the last 2 years say they want to start a company just helping average people figure out what the hell is going on with Bitcoin and should they invest in it or not. Because every time the average person goes to these coin exchange sites, it's like another language to them, right? So it's like techies talking to techies, and maybe because I'm not a deep techie, I can say this, or maybe by saying it, you dismiss me because you're techies and I'm not, and you're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I'm a human, and I think it's about the people, stupid. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to humanize even blockchain, and I think what we're trying to do with Collaborate is to do that by connecting the peer-to-peer economy, often in cities, humanizing the equation, so that humans are involved in the transactions. They're incented to be part of the process. They share in the success of the process. They get incented through the ecosystem to be active community members and citizens in the community. And hopefully through all of this, we can actually get closer to that big, bold, ambitious goal I talked about earlier about creating a local but globally interconnected digital community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Boy, for this astounding overview of beginning with the smart cities and ending up with it's the people stupid. Are there any questions in the audience?
Yeah, thank you. Did I understand you right? So your platform is kind of proof of stake platform?
Well,
It's because token holders.
so it's not limited to one single blockchain, first of all. So for the identity and reputation solution, we'll most likely be using Sovereign, which is, they have a separate consensus mechanism called Cohen, which is not, it's basically public but permission. For the transaction layer, so monetary transactions will most likely be using Ethereum, which in the future will be proof of stake. And for other layers, other fitting blockchains.
Actually, Jonathan, can you come up here?
Yep.
So Jonathan is a member of the Datarella team, and we also have for Collaborate a management team, which consists of Jonathan, myself, another guy, Moises, and Lawrence from the Outlier Ventures. So I think it makes sense to have him formally on the stage so we can interact with responding to your questions.
I'm formally here.
And he's a person too.
Okay. So actually, what I wanted to ask, so you mentioned that token holders will be able to vote for board of directors, for instance, or some other decisions. How are you planning to prevent that too many tokens are controlled by
Good question.
people or companies? So the
Yeah.
platform.
That's a big issue for us because in the community we're trying to serve, there's a real and we've been challenged with trying to solve this around the SAFT. Are all you familiar with the SAFT, right? Like a pre-sale of the ICO, and that's usually like a privilege to accredited investors. And in the community we're serving, there's a lot of angst around that. Like privileging people with wealth is like same old problems with capitalism, right? So we're exacerbating it. So then the question is, how do you control for that? And so we aim to ensure that it's one person, one vote. So it doesn't matter. you have to be a token holder, but you don't. But if you have 1,000 tokens or 1 token, you only get to vote once. The challenge is how we implement that, and that's also through sovereign, right?
Right. So I think your question has 2 parts. Basically, we have the liquid democracy part, which is voting about governance, how is the protocol, and how is the overall platform working, how is your local app working, how are the profits distributed, and so on. And secondly, you have the I have tokens, so I can impact the local economy or the economy using this token. And for the first part, that is completely unrelated to how many tokens you have. So
it just depends on the one person.
exactly, that's a goal, but it's not a simple. Well, it's a super hard problem actually, cryptographically speaking. So we're working very closely with Sovereign, using basically the latest of zero knowledge proofs, and I'll give you more updates when we're further along.
Yeah, sure. I understand. Like, it's not gonna have a certain like fixed decision on that.
I never heard of sovereigns, so excuse my ignorance.
No.
There is missing the self in the title sovereign, and you said it is a permission, so it's controlled basically by the entity sovereign. So why did you choose this way and not civic, viewport, or some other?
Well, so permissioned does not mean that sovereign. So sovereign is SOVRIN. It's not sovereign like the
Sovereign nation.
exactly, and it is actually based on self-sovereign identity. The concept of self-sovereign identity meaning I control my data and with whom my identity data is shared. It's permission in that aspect that we need some type of institutions or issuers that can verify that if I say I have a passport from Sweden, which I have, the Swedish government has to say that this passport is valid, right? So it's permission in that way, and not that if I say I have a passport from Macedonia, Rebecca can't say, yeah, that's correct, because she's not the Macedonian government. So, yeah.
So decentralized permission.
Exactly,
Okay.
public permission.
I could see the projects very peer-to-peer related. If you talk about music sharing, if you talk about credit, peer-to-peer lending,
Yeah.
and those things, and car sharing, which is very popular through Uber and so on, and the issues that Uber has provoked in many cities in the world.
Yeah.
There's also a nice example in São Paulo in Brazil, where the city government tried to make the same software in order to give a chance to taxi drivers to adapt to the new situation. But what I don't see, and it's a kind of philosophical question, I don't see the government cities, because in my opinion I see a peer-to-peer opportunity which is given through the technology, which is just the evolution of capitalism.
Yeah.
But I don't see the real core of the problem that cities want to improve themselves and give the citizens, as you described at the very beginning of the presentation, a better standard of life. And the question would be if there are more involvement of cities or governments or governmental projects jumping into the initiative to make different projects, not the typical intuitive peer-to-peer one.
Yeah. We're mostly focused on the peer-to-peer space for now, but having said that, we have it's a pretty ambitious goal that may not be achieved and maybe by some could be perceived to be malicious, but it's not. Now, our goal is in some ways that some of these platforms usurp and eliminate the need for some of these platform capitalists, and that the cities themselves formally endorse the projects using our stack and actually essentially outlaw the alternative. So it's happening anyway without us. London outlawed Uber and it's not allowed in Barcelona.
Right.
So there's a void in these cities anyway, and because I've been working in the city space for 6 years. I was just in Kazakhstan teaching mayors about smart cities, so I have good connections with the city, with mayors and city leaders. The idea is when our technology is ready, and we have, like, one of the issues we have is until you have a critical mass, you can't. I've always felt this way with city stuff, right? Like, so like a lot of cities want to like try to move away from cars, and I agree with that. We need to move away from car dependence. But if the city does not provide quality alternatives to car dependence, you can't just say no more cars in the city if you don't have proper integrated multimodal public transit services. So same thing. You can't go to a city that already has Uber operating and say, we want you to outlaw Uber and and adopt our platform if our platform has 12 taxi drivers and there's 30,000 Uber drivers in the same city. So what we're thinking is right now it's a little premature to do much with cities. I'm doing a lot of work with the city of Barcelona right now in the collaborative economy space. So because I live there and I'm working that space, so we're thinking they'll be one of our test beds. Eindhoven, not the mayor, she's one of the city councils, said she'd like to pilot some of our work when we're ready. So the idea is to collaborate more with cities. First of all, through the peer-to-peer platforms that we're building that actually have a high relevance to quality of life in cities that cities might want to endorse or support. Secondly, like I mentioned with that one slide with the stack, is there's a few things like in governance around liquid democracy. I forget where that is now. Oh, it doesn't show up on here. And then data commons are topics that cities themselves, or smart cities, are struggling to resolve, and they want to. You mentioned Brazil. Rio was one of the first cities I met that actually was trying to experiment with liquid democracy at the municipal governance layer. So what we're thinking is we'll build this for our app layers for the peer-to-peer economy. We'll support them getting access to the cities when it makes sense for them to get in there. And then over time, with that relationship we build with the cities, we can work with them with some of these other modules. Maybe we'll build others too that are more directly relevant to the city management.
I think that the Uber examples are interesting because the barriers of the growth of the interest of Uber drivers or peer-to-peer drivers in this example is that if I don't earn any money out of that, I'll not be interested in doing that.
Yeah.
But it's the normal capitalism.
Yeah.
But it doesn't solve the problem of mobility at all. Perhaps cities have to do much more in order to have more cars.
Yeah.
And then it's of course cannot be a capitalist solution anymore.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, the Uber one is obviously a highly politically charged one, but I think for us, I should probably be transparent. I founded Cooperative, the taxi app project, but I believe there's a lot of potential there because the example I gave of Austin already happened in Denver, Colorado, and it's happening around the world, but in small scale. And so if it could be interconnected, I mean, these are licensed. Our model for that, they have to be licensed taxi drivers. So this is not peers that are driving private vehicles. They are existing licensed regulated taxi drivers forming cooperatives, having technology that allows them to compete with Uber in the sense of similar technology and interconnected with one app, so their reputation and ID and everything travels with the user wherever they go.
I think there was a question from FinCom.
I like your idea that the taxi drivers have a middle layer.
Uh-huh.
How do you avoid becoming capitalist? How do you determine fair pricing?
Yeah, good question. We've had some heated debates within my team in Cooperative. So I started Cooperative, and then Jamie, who founded Outlier Ventures and Datarella, said, you know what, it's better that I take the lead over this whole initiative. So I sort of stepped away from day-to-day involvement in Cooperative. But the debates we've had, so I'm the least capitalist, even though I'm a professor of business of my founding team. So
I don't know this capitals.
So I I had to, yeah, he and I had some good debate. He stayed at my house a month ago, and I almost kicked him out. Too capitalist for me. You're so capitalist, go pay for an Airbnb or a Marriott, dude. You don't need to stay in my house. No, I have been very insistent. We are not charging a transaction fee, period. We are not doing it. Cooperative. And this is one of the big issues. Even if you know MyTaxi and Halo and these other apps that provide a somewhat similar service to Uber for regulated taxis, licensed taxis, they often charge between 2 and 10% of every fare, every trip to as revenue. And so we are either going fully free, fully open source, totally free, or we may do a as a service model for the cooperative. So if you have 1 to 10 drivers, you pay the equivalent in tokens, because there's another way to create utility with our tokens too, possibly, right? So you can you have to pay equivalent of $50 a month if you have 1 to 10 drivers in your cooperative. You have to pay, 100 if you have 10 to 20, some kind of scale thing, but it's only by the number of drivers, not by the transaction. And this is one of the biggest issues the true sharing economy people have with what's happened with the fake sharing economy, 1.0 sharing, is that the transaction percentages charged by the intermediary platforms become monopolistic, and they actually are obviously the ones profiting the most, and they're taking away profit from the people creating value, the drivers or the providers of the home. So I don't want to be involved in the transaction. At most, I'm open to the idea of charging the cooperative as a whole, but an amount that should be hopefully insignificant for their. But our big goal, and this is part of this community token economy vision of Outlier Ventures, is that if you, as an app, own tokens, you have a vested interest in ensuring the ecosystem is functioning well and is vibrant. And so actually, you may not need to monetize anything in your normal delivery of your technology, and all you do is profit from the growth and the value of the tokens. Now that's one model we haven't, I'm not saying we've 100% embraced it, nor have 100% of the app developers we're talking to said, yeah, we're okay with just having some tokens and that's it. They still want to find some way to monetize, but generally speaking, we don't want to monetize the transaction.
We could set similar and different.
We have, for the sake of democracy, there's a question.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. My question is a few parts. You mentioned that developers are rewarded to create value in the platform. And after that, when everyone starts using the platform, obviously the value of the token goes up, and the developers that's basically monetize and sell it off. The first part is, which I didn't get, was to whom are these developers selling it to? That's the first question.
To whom are they selling what to?
Their tokens too. That's the first question. And the second question is, given that I see this as a really big potential, that a lot of people start using it, and we know that in the first 6 months to a year, and like when the token gets launched, etc., there's a lot of instability and volatility.
Yeah.
How do you plan to control that such that you still maintain that overall, democracy, liquid democracy, and not have some sort of hidden capitalism or someone actually is dominating the token because the value has gone up, and therefore you can't, you sort of, it becomes a barrier in itself in allowing value to be created.
If you have an answer to that, you should join our team now, because we've been thinking about that a lot, but we don't have all the answers to that. By the way, I'm going to give this to Michael to decide who gets it. Some point. I don't want to make such a decision. Maybe nobody wants it. So, I don't know if any of us want to. I mean, Michael's been doing some thinking around the cryptoeconomics on this topic too.
That is the most important question we are thinking about in the last weeks or so. And we have different answers to that, and we are just working with our colleagues at Imperial we were discussing it, and we are weighing one answer against the other. We don't have the exact answer. So, for example, we play around with a 2-token model. one app token to use within the application, and one token, a core token, which could be the token you earn money with, which could be traded on an exchange. So that would be one possible way to solve that. But we are very much aware of this problem.
We've talked about, at least in the initial ICO, capping the amount of tokens per wallet or something. We've talked about other ways of addressing hoarding and speculation. But then when you go overboard on that, then you have another problem, right? So you certainly meet the needs of the cooperative community. You really want this to be by and for the community, and then you eliminate this thing being attractive to anyone to invest in the ICO, in which case we don't have the funding to continue building the technology or to grow the project, which means nobody wins. So we're struggling with it. We've got, like you said, we've got some amazing people that are faculty at Imperial College of London that are cryptoeconomic experts that are helping us model different scenarios that we're playing with. One is this two-token design. One is a singular token with this citizenship reward thing, and the token may have some controls over it to affect that the fluctuation isn't, to minimize the fluctuation speculative nature, but not eliminate it. And a lot of projects that are in this space have been struggling to figure that out. What's the, I want to say Arctic, but it's not Arctic. What is it? They came out of Austin. They did a taxi thing there actually too. There's another, they haven't launched their ICO yet, but they actually came out with saying they're going to have a zero speculative token. And they write in they like transparently say, if you actually want to invest in this because you hope it might someday be worth more, you should go somewhere else because we're not doing that. But, you know, even though I wrote a book called Post-Capitalism and I'm not like a hardcore capitalist anymore, I'm not anti-capitalist either, and I think people who invest in a project have a right to actually have some return on that project. So it's like, how do we balance all these conflicting interests? It's not easy.
I think we could see in this room something similar. I don't know if it was the theme or the Bitcoin meeting. There was the Swan City model, which is a similar issue but a different model. Which you also have the Uber and the Airbnb apps or communities. And you are supposed to pay with the Swan City token. So in that moment, you are supposed to pay the gas for the structure. I don't like that model so much because I would need another token in order to pay for a transaction. I prefer to use my Bitcoins or whatever. But I think at least it's the problem solved that they have the gas in order to maintain infrastructure. I don't know if it's a possible situation for you.
Yeah, I mean, we will have a look. We are having a look at, as we already stated, different models, and we are not decided yet. And maybe we have to just go for one model and adapt later. So it's.
I have a simple question. I'm not very good with the technical stuff, to be honest.
Good. I should be able to answer it.
It's very simple when I look at the idea of smart cities and the way you say humanizing things.
Yeah.
You ask so many people who would like to be a part of a smart city what they want. It is true. Anyone or any normal person would say I need more social contact and similar stuff.
Yeah.
But the question I'm impressed with always is like how many of them are encouraged or how many of them are really willing to take that move. You know, hundreds of people around my work, my friends and all, they love to be in a countryside or do whatever they want, but they are somehow stuck or I don't know, like slave of the system or something. They somehow have a love-hate relationship with that. And with these new things coming up and overall, I know there would be many people saying, yes, why not, what a great idea, but how many of them would really be so dynamic to fit in that model and when it's implemented, how much success we would have it. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's just the core thing.
So you're wondering how many people in the world would actually engage in like this kind of ecosystem that we're talking about?
Just for example,
Yeah.
like, would they be really still stuck? They say, no, I stick to my old routine, or I would really say, yeah, why not? I'll do something new. Or maybe it's a generation question.
Well, you just hit on one of my first answers. The younger generation, we're finding tends. If you look at the surveys of the Gen Xers, they are. What we're finding is that they are much more engaged in the sharing economy, but true sharing. Another big thing in that audience is a lot more interest in access over ownership, which is one of the big topics in the sharing economy. So the younger generation tends to not actually care about acquiring a bunch of material possessions. And that might be a factor of economics too, right? Like the economy's not as good, there's not as many jobs. Buying a car or buying a house seems less realistic for a lot of the younger generation now. And so I don't know if it's just economic. I don't think it is based on the surveys. It's economic and it's value shifts. And there's a shift away from materialism and ownership to access. So then if there's a shift to access, do you care whether your access comes from Uber or Cooperative? To be honest with you, probably not. The majority of people don't. And that was one of our slides where we talked about that. And this, I think, been one of the barriers for the platform cooperative type community to have more success globally, is that they believe that people, just because their values are better and more aligned with people, that more people will just adopt their model anyway. But I think what we've come to realize is that actually you have to provide as good or better service and value to a user, and if you can do that, you can win them over. And I think some of our ideas there that are not fully cooked yet, but when you look at that example of Ingi and that ecosystem of services she could get, and she can get citizenship rewards for just downloading another app, which doesn't cost her anything. We have some other ideas I didn't even mention, which I think are super cool. Because one of the issues I do have with capitalism is the fact that we have a lot of people excluded from the economy right now. I think that's going to get worse, not better. So we have some ideas around inclusive, how we can make this economy more inclusive. So one idea, for example, through the citizenship reward model, is that you can enter this ecosystem without having any money to buy tokens. You could enter it. So one way you might earn citizenship rewards is by downloading 3 apps in the ecosystem. Great. Step 1, you fill out your profile, and we now have a profile that's portable and goes to all the apps. Step 2. Step 3, you actually engage in one transaction. You get more points. Guess what? Oh, and actually Peter, the guy from Resonate, said, well, why not we have citizenship rewards for things like an entrepreneur who's thinking about creating a new platform, a new app. They could actually use our community for surveys. So they could send out a survey to our user group, and if you fill out a survey, you get points. But what is my point with all this thing? There's some cool things in here for users that might be very sticky for them, right? So one is to entice them to join, and another is to get them to stay. If they can earn points that can be converted to tokens, which actually could create real value for exchanging real products and services in the community without having any money to start, that's pretty powerful. So we don't have it all resolved, but in the end, no matter what service is delivered in the ecosystem, if it's not competitive in terms of the value it provides to the user, it won't win over users.
May I add perhaps one other possible answer to that? I mean, if you experience pain, you will most probably join. Those taxi drivers in Austin, they experienced pain. And they fought Uber back, not by throwing stones at their cabs, but coming up with a different and competitive alternative. Because they had to. And I think there is a certain number of people who experience pain in some ways, and as soon as they have the means, a very easy to use, out of the box tool to play with, they will do it.
Do you think the right motivation to go to the platform because you're forced to do so? I mean, it's not free will if I'm going there because I experienced pain. So
I think what he's saying is pain is a really good motivator, right? So if you're really frustrated, you feel like you have no solution, you're going to look for alternatives, and you're more willing to switch. So switching costs go down to 0 if you're a taxi driver being squeezed out of the system, right? So that certainly is a great incentive. But that's not the only one that works. The citizenship reward can be a good incentive for users that has nothing to do with pain. It's opportunity, it's gain. Peter Harris wants to join our project as Resonate because he likes the possibility for synergies with some of the other apps in our ecosystem. The fab market likes it because they don't really have the resources to build all the underlying horizontal stack that we're working to build. So maybe that's a pain for them. So sure, they're inspired by the pain of, well, it's going to cost too much and take too much time to build what we're going to build anyway. But it's a gain for them. Look, it's like a win-win for them that they get to be part of our ecosystem. They don't have to build all of it. It's faster for them. So I think it's a blend of things that will drive people. We won't get everyone. We don't need to get everyone.
I think it's a mix.
What motivates people to use an app, or like why do people use Facebook? Sure, everyone is on it, so you have the network effect. That's one part, but there's also the design. So you get these little attention and satisfactory rewards, like, oh yeah, I got a like on my whatever. And with tokens, you basically have that on speed. You don't just earn a little ego boost. You can actually earn some monetary or other value through a token. I mean, now the question comes, how can we use that in a good way and not in a behavioral changing way that maybe some other technologies are doing?
I think for me, at the end, it all comes down to two things. You either have a product which means a vitamin for someone or a painkiller. And I think we can have both. We can offer a painkiller for taxi drivers in Austin or similar cities, and we can offer a vitamin for people who would do things differently but not having had a opportunity to do so because they have been missing the right tool. And as Boyd said, we don't have to attract them all.
So I would be really curious about the organizational / legal setup they're using to build this. So you mentioned like voting for the board of directors as an example.
Yeah.
And I know at least on the German, the current regulatory and legal framework, this would be kind of hard to pull off at least. And also obviously it's a question, is it going to be a co-op itself? I know Resonate are a co-op underlying, so how are you figuring that stuff out, if you have figured it out already?
We've explored it a lot, including with Outlier Ventures that have experts in compliance and regulatory issues. The options on the table, none of which have been decided yet, are, at least in the interim, to form an LLC in the UK. One is to create a foundation in Switzerland. Another one is to create a co-op in some jurisdiction. Hasn't been decided. We've looked at Singapore. We haven't decided yet is the answer. We've looked at pretty much every scenario that there is. For-profit, cooperative, and foundation. They all have the pros and cons. And depending on which organizational vehicle you choose, you have to decide the jurisdiction that's the best place for that. So we're still working on that.
Will it be like a part of the white paper as well?
Yeah, it has to be in the white paper because at least it has to be. We're hoping to start a SAF, this pre-sale to accredited investors, in January. So to do that, we have to have our white paper ready, and the accredited investors are going to have to know who's authorizing the access to future tokens that they're investing in, and so that has to be a formalized entity. Now it's possible, and we've talked about this, that we could incorporate some organization in the interim that would then transfer the rights to issue the tokens at a future date to a foundation created later, but we haven't decided that yet. But we will, in phase one, we will have some entity incorporated and responsible for the issuance of the SAF investment.
I think the most important aspect here is that we will not decide on a stable structure for all time. We will just decide for the very first step, and we'll then see how that works out. So we have to match expectations. Okay, more questions? If not, no, we have a question. No?
Sorry,
Yes?
I missed the start, so I might miss something. Are you focusing on the existing cities, or are there also concepts
Haven't been in the smart city space for a long time. I've had a lot of exposure to the new city builds, and I'm not a big fan of them. They're actually the opposite of putting the human in the center of the city, because they're actually designing the city without concern for humans, really. In most cases. Like, there's a lot of cities being built in China. I don't know how many of you know this, but there'll be 100 new cities built in China over the next 10 years that basically don't exist today, that will have over 1 million people in the next 10 years. And there's not one human that's going to live in that city that's been involved in the design process or thinking of the infrastructure or anything. Basically, it's very top-down, government-controlled, similar with even the project in Russia, outside of Moscow, Skolkovo, similar thing, top-down. All the new city builds, Masdar, they're all being built top-down, very tech-centric view of smart cities. They're devoid of humans because there aren't humans living there yet. So how do you engage and embrace the local community and co-creating a city when they're not even living there yet? So they're going with the model, you build it, they will come, and in many cases they will in countries like China that has such massive urbanization of their population. But we're focusing more, and our relationships are more with existing cities that are pioneering, embracing how to be more efficient with their economy and sharing of resources and improving quality of life and well-being. Cities like Barcelona, Amsterdam in Europe, Vienna to some extent, London somewhat. These are cities, Paris, that are really proactive in embracing the sharing economy. Seoul, South Korea, put themselves on the map in 2012, saying they'll be the world capital of the sharing economy, and they have become that, basically. So these are existing cities with lots of people that have lots of challenges, and they believe the sharing economy can play a role in addressing inequality and distribution of resources and reducing emissions and other things. So I think the opportunity for us at the moment is more there.
Okay. So if there's no more question right now, I want to do 4 things. First, I want to devote this one copy of Post-Capitalist Entrepreneurship to you for the toughest question. Second, I want to thank you again thank you very much for this fantastic overview. Thank you. Third thing is I want to give this young man the opportunity to announce another meetup, a smart contract meetup.
Thank you. So for those of you who are interested in the more technical aspects of creating smart contracts, there will be a new meetup. So the first evening will be on the 14th of December at a Burda Media Company, and we will talk about how to program smart contracts, what tools to use, how to interact with smart contracts once they are deployed. We are planning to have more meetups like that every 2 or 3 months. So if you're interested in the really hands-on work, how to really create them, I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
What's the name of the group?
It's a Munich Smart Contracts.
Telling. The 4th thing I want to do is I want to invite all of you to the Blockchain Dialog, a German language-driven blockchain conference happening on Thursday. And I will, for example, moderate a panel with the topic Digital Twin, der digitale Zwilling. If you're interested in, so it's in the IHK rooms near Ostbahnhof on Thursday. So
it's part of the crowd day.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the general event is called Crowd Dialog, and the blockchain stream is called Blockchain Dialog. So
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Is it possible to get the PowerPoint presentation from Cohen?
Question?
Yeah, sure.
How can we manage?
I'll let you guys figure out how to distribute to whoever wants it from the...
Through the
Sure.
meetup
So
page.
we can do it via the meetup group if you're a member.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay, cool.
I'll post it there. Okay. So I have said 4 things, but I have one last thing. I want to thank you for coming. and I wish you a very nice Christmas. See you next year.
Thank you.